Alright everyone, so one day I was looking through the comments of the daily level and I stumbled across this post saying that if they could have 5 of their levels rated, these would be it. One name caught my eye, Bloodsplat. I've been in this community long enough to know that most levels by random creators with blood in the title are hell-themed levels 2 at the speed of light, usually at the Cataclysm part. So I checked this guy's levels and eventually I found it, Bloodsplat. I was not surprised when I saw that it in fact had Dim Rain 47's famous song as the music. So I gave it a try, and I was not surprised to see that it was like most recent section hell levels. This one wasn't good. I decided to do a no-clip run of it so I could see the whole level and to see if it used the whole song and to see how it lined up to the actual music, just how it sings. And on top of that, since this level isn't even star rated or star rate worthy for that matter, I didn't want to put in the effort of actually beating this. As it turns out, the level uses all of At the Speed of Light, so the level is over 4 minutes long. I probably should have used the practice music hack instead, to be honest. So, today, I'm going to be going through this level and giving Decimal, the creator of this level, some advice on what went horribly wrong and how he can improve. Before I start, I just want to say do not send Decimal hate over this level. Nobody deserves hate if they made a level that isn't good. I mean, we all have to start somewhere, and you would not like it if someone started bullying you because you're not good at something. The first issue I have with this level is how messy it is. For example, in the first part, there's a giant pile of saws, which is a very common tactic by inexperienced creators to fill in spaces and make sure there's no secret ways. In addition, I'd like to call attention to how little connection there is to the spikes. The spikes are just floating there, which does not look good. And is only acceptable if you're making like a weird challenge level and don't intend on it being graded. Like, if you were to make something like the first wave in Console Depression. What you should do is have the spikes be attached to something, whether that be a chain or a block. Another thing you could do is make it into sort of a mound of ground spikes like this. Block design wise, this level is terrible. Much of the level is done with the simple default blocks. This doesn't look good. I would suggest looking at some of the more well-known hell levels, such as Bloodbath, Cataclysm, Sakup and Hell, not to be directly and completely ripped off from, but to get an idea of where to go with block design, give you a starting point. Another huge problem is how the wave structures are not filled in. There's numerous ways to make wave structures, and this is not one of them. You have a few options. 1. Fill them in entirely. This can be done like this with the ground spikes, and you can also put other blocks inside of them to make the level feel more complete, have a more elaborate block design, that kind of stuff. Or you can just fill it in with completely black blocks. 2. Make them be like waves in a way. This involves not filling in the structures, but instead putting slopes in a way that makes the slopes that make up the tunnel feel like wavy lines, sort of like this. Corner pieces are also a real helper, and you really do need to use those if you want to actually be taken seriously. 3. Basically ship, but you're a wave. This is basically where you build something that looks like a ship part, kind of, but you're in the wave game mode. You can throw pretty much whatever you want in here, such as club step monsters, or build structures that the player would need to pass through. Just make sure the passages aren't ridiculously tight unless you're trying to make a really hard level. We don't need another Silent Circles. Another major issue with this level is the lack of decoration and structures. Most of the level feels very empty, and that ties into an issue I'll bring up later. Pretty much all levels need decoration if they want to get rated. And when it comes to hell levels, you need to put decoration in that sells you on the idea of it being in hell. For example, let's take a look at an old impossible level called Realm of Bloodshadow. There's loads of decoration here, like chains and spice on chains. Another example is the famous level Bloodbath. There's spike gradients and dead bushes everywhere, giving us the impression that this is essentially the Geometry Dash equivalent of hell. There's also clip-set monsters in the level, which usually look pretty good if you do them well, and they can also make for interesting gameplay like in Clubstep. Also, no offense, but this is probably the worst demon face I've ever seen. It barely resembles a demon face. It's way too blocky. Try using more rounded shapes, and again, look at levels that have done this sort of thing. You could always get some inspiration from there. Another thing I'd like to point out is how just about every famous hell level is red, or at least has dark colors. And there is this way for a reason. This is how hell is. It's supposed to be dark. Levels like Bloodbath don't have to be completely red all the way through. Like Michigan's part and Evasive's part are both red in some places, but are for the most part gray. Generally, hell is supposed to be fiery, you know? So why is this important? Because the colors in Bloodsplat are absolutely terrible. At first, it seems fine, as the background is red. However, midway through the Cataclysm part, there's this ugly background that's really hard on the eyes that is multicolored. Things only get worse once you pass into the Bloodbath section, where all logic about hell goes out the window. The colors in the latter parts of the level make no sense, being blue, green, purple, and what does this have to do with hell? On top of that, this level is called Bloodsplat. Blood is red, so you'd think they would try at least to keep the colors semi-consistent. On top of that, the colors are way too bright. In a hell level, the only reason the background should ever be bright is for pulses. Also, the background almost never turns red again once you pass the Cataclysm part of the song, except for like once. One major aspect that just can't be overlooked is the use of text in this level. Text can work fine if you use it right. Going back to Realm of Bloodshadow, the most up-to-date version of the level has text, but it's not overly distracting. It also helps to not use the Basab font if you're going to try to be threatening. I don't care how serious your threats are. If you're to tell me things like, "This land is forsaken, your blood is ours," or "Death is inevitable" in Basab font, it just doesn't feel as threatening as it would in a font like this. The thing is, the text here is used poorly. For some reason, once you reach the Bloodbath part, there's all this text telling me what the next game mode is. You don't need to do that, I can see the portal just fine. For some reason, this even stopped after a while. Like you couldn't even be bothered to continue with this idea. Also, one huge pet peeve of mine is the text saying, "Great Easy Demon 10 stars." First of all, the layering is bad. There's no reason for the text to be on top of each other. 2, that is extremely cringy. And I'm sorry to say this, but this is not rate-worthy at all. On top of that, and I don't mean to be a dick here, but is English your first language? Because I think 50% but not changing is not grammatically correct. I can barely understand what you're saying. If I'm correct, you're saying that there's a 50% chance of dying here, which is a dick move, by the way. Never have it where the player can unfairly die. Also, the update text is completely unnecessary. This is something you can say in the description, or in the comments, or with your posts, not in the level itself. One last thing I want to touch on is the shake triggers. Don't randomly insert shake triggers. It has to either sync up with the song or something with the gameplay, otherwise it's random pointless shaking. Now we get into the real meat of the level, the gameplay. Let me just say this right now. The gameplay in this level is terrible. First of all, there's pretty much no music sync as far as I can tell. As a matter of fact, there's not even any flow to the game mode change. Sometimes there's just a portal in the middle of a small part of the song. Other times there's an opportunity to change the game mode, but there's nothing. In addition to this, for some arbitrary reason, during this one wave part, there is literally no gameplay. I even turned off preview mode so that you can see there was absolutely nothing here. You can't just do this in a level unless you have like art or something. And in a level that's as empty as this, it just looks incredibly lazy and is very boring. Then there is this ship part, which is very sloppy, and it's literally just spikes and blocks spammed about randomly, and you can avoid it all by flying to the top. Which brings me to another point. Where are your ground spikes? If you're trying to make a demon level, which I know you are, you generally want it so that you can't touch the ground, so that, to keep the player on their toes. And also, even if you can't even reach the ground, I would advise having them anyway, to give the level a more full feeling. Take the ship at the drop of club step, where you can't really get to these ground fights, but they still serve to make the level feel more full than if they weren't there. And also, Realm of Blood Shadow does this as well. Even though you cannot reach the ground spikes from the top and bottom of the screen in some places, they still flesh out the level more. Like, if you took out the ground spikes, it would look empty as hell. This ball part here uses way more jump rings than is necessary. And it raises the question of why make it a ball in the first place, if you're just going to not even use the gravity switching capability of the game mode. It's better to make the gameplay more varied, so that you aren't just doing the same thing over and over again. Try having it so that you touch onto some foreground and actually use the ball game mode for what it's made for. There's also pointless parts in the level. For instance, this ball part right here and this cube part. You don't need to do anything, because there's nothing that mandates that you have to hit these rings thanks to the lack of obstacles. And this goes back to the point of earlier, put some ground spikes, god damn it. There's also this cube part, which for some reason you can just drop down here and avoid the jumping. You really need to cover up those holes. The difficulty is very unbalanced. This UFO part, for instance, is quite the difficulty spike, considering it's just a bunch of jitter clicking, and then this ball part immediately after is very awkwardly timed, and due to the poor syncing of this level, it's even harder. Then there's parts like this robot that are way too easy. I understand balancing a level can be difficult, but you should at least attempt to not make the gameplay horribly unbalanced. And now, the big one. The actual quality of the gameplay itself. There's very little variety in this gameplay, making the level very boring. Each robot part is just the same few jumps over some spikes. Like, even the same 4 spikes pretty much. No gravity changes or anything interesting. The cubes are very similar, mostly being basic jumps. Then there's the straight flying parts. This happens twice throughout the level, once early on and once at the very end. Both times it's used, it goes on for way too long, and there's so much more that can be done with the gameplay. I mean, take my own level, Riding Through Hell, which is still unfinished as of recording this. In this part of the song, it's a cue, which jumps that somewhat syncs up with the gameplay as well as being colored somewhat appropriately. During this part of the song in Bloodsplat, it's nothing but straight fly and a blue background. Then there's the Bloodlust extension part of the song. That is the part that was the extension in Bloodlust. I already talked about the very last part, so I won't repeat myself. Again, I want to show my own level as a demonstration of how more can be done without being Bloodlust level difficulty. And then, what is done in Bloodsplat. In Riding Through Hell, the final race through Hell begins with the music fading out briefly before you're thrust into a triple speed ship that quickly goes back and forth between dual mode, and the rest I'll let you watch. One thing of note here is that there's speed changes. It's not all triple speed until the end. It also goes into a quadruple speed part, which flows with the song as well, and even slows down to half speed and normal speed before the very end. Now, whether or not you like this gameplay, you cannot deny that it is more thought out than what I'm about to show you. Like, first of all, even going into the final drop, there's no flow, it just randomly happens in the middle of the UFO part, which is very copy-pasted, by the way. And by the way, why are there random D blocks here? This only affects the wave game mode. The UFO does not need them. This part is also very slow, which can work, but I'll talk more about that later and how it can work. Then there's this cube segment, which isn't very intense considering what song is playing right now. And what follows next is one of the worst things I've ever seen unironically put in a level. A double speed UFO that just randomly happens in the middle of this bit of the song, and the block time. It's worse than Maverick Bird by Zentic Alpha. At least that level had structures. This is just straight lines. Now, I know some people who might know me best enough will know a friend of mine named Messieri did something similar in his level, Helllands. However, it's slightly less bad there for a couple reasons. One, there's at least spikes on the poles, so there's something there rather than just lines. Strange as it sounds, the spikes do make it slightly resemble more geometrical hell than just being lines. 2. This part actually flows with the song somewhat. I mean, the speed change is slightly off by a few blocks, but there is at least an attempt. 3. At least it's not as long as it is in Bloodsplat. In Helllands, there's only 5 of these poles before going into some different gameplay, and it doesn't feel as long and dragged out. In Bloodsplat, there's 44 of these copy-pasted poles, and since they're just like lines, there's nothing to even look at either. There was some sort of design on the poles. I could maybe partially look past that. I mean, I'd still say that's obnoxiously copy-pasted, and still doesn't flow well, and the gameplay is so copy-pasted it would make Viper blush. Now, I know some of you might remember that I said something about going into the final drop slow. Well, back to the Blood Shadow realm. Yes, it is true that the first part of the drop is a half-speed swing counter, but there's a couple things to take into account. First of all, going to the drop is more intense with a triple speed mini-ship as the place goes dark. Second of all, there's way more variety in the gameplay in Realm of Blood Shadow. The last drop has differing speeds, sizes, and game modes, and even though the initial drop is slow, the gameplay slowly picks up speed to humanly impossible levels. So even a silent level has more differing gameplay than this level. So, with all that said, this level is terrible. The decoration is almost non-existent, the colors are terrible, and the gameplay is awful. Honestly, this has no chance of being graded. As Let's Talk so eloquently put it, this is not future-worthy. Sorry to say that. But you know what, Decimal? If there's one good thing about messing up royally, it's at least there's a lot of room for improvement. And it's okay to be a not-so-great creator right off the bat. I didn't start off with creating levels like Riding Through Hell or even Saccharin City. I started off with a couple levels on my old account, old lunatic boy, called Electro Drift and Mother Clutter Funker, which both are pretty mediocre levels. And if you take my advice into consideration, you could actually one day get a rated level. It will take a lot of effort, but if you do put in the effort, you will get somewhere, I promise. I also want you to know that I don't hate you. I didn't make this level out of malice. I don't even know you personally. I made this video so that you and newer creators like you know how you can improve. But I will say, I do actually kind of get an ironic sense of enjoyment from this level. It's not that hard, so most of the level can be beaten without much struggle, even as long as it is. I hope to see more levels from you should you try to better yourself. Bye bye.